Let me introduce one of my colleagues, organizing committee, Nicholas Pepis, who is from the University of Texas at Austin. And Nicholas.
Thank you to the two presidents of the academies, and I'm sorry we're not going to see Harvey until later. But thanks especially to Tom Khalil. I mean, there couldn't have been a better introduction. In about 5 minutes, he was able to combine all the great initiatives that are going out in this country right now on convergence, and at the same time show really how we have great leadership which is concerned about convergence. It will not surprise you to tell you that I don't think even Joe knows that if you go to Webster and then you check very carefully the word convergence, the first use of the word convergence was in 1713, 300 years ago, by William Durham in a book that he published called Physical Theology. And this book had to do about convergence and divergence of ideas. Convergence comes from the Latin word convergere, which means to come from different points and come to a center, to a certain unique idea. I don't know if we will be able to achieve uniqueness, but I must admit that I'm delighted to introduce Phil Sharp, because Phil has been behind a lot of the initiatives and the efforts in the area of convergence through the MIT report that came 2 years ago, through a wonderful article that was actually a policy document that was published in Science in July of 2011 on promoting convergence in biomedical sciences. Phil, we are celebrating his 20 years from the time he got the Nobel Prize in 1993. And of course, as you know, he's an institute professor at MIT. And today he has selected to talk to us about things that we could not achieve if we did not have convergence, if we don't all work together. So it's, where's Phil? Oh yeah, you're there, sorry.
Thanks, Nicholas. It's a big honor to be invited to speak to you this morning. Congratulations, Joe, on bringing this together. And your charge was really right on and remarkable, and it's fabulous to see the leaders of the Academy here, and as well as Tom Khalil. I don't need to speak specifically about convergence necessarily. I think everyone in this room is here because they're interested in this subject. And as Joe described it, it is an increasingly important part of what our future will be and what the future of society will be. And what I'm going to talk about at the beginning is sort of setting a little context as to why we're here and what it means, and perhaps a little bit about where it's going to go, and then to give you a few comments about culture and convergence and the issues that we see at MIT in making all this happen. And it's useful to think about the history because sometimes we deal with day-to-day issues. We don't look back at a broader perspective and say, where are we going and where will we be in 15, 20, 30 years? What problems do we need to solve, and what science and technology and investments we need to make now to be able to solve those problems 20, 30, and 40 years ago. So let's think a little bit in the context of life science and part of the convergence of life science with physical science and computation and engineering. How did we get here? Well, if you think about it, it really started back in 1953 when Watson and Crick discovered the structure of DNA. For the first time, we had a concept as humanity of what the structure of the information that was transmitted between generations and then was used to reproduce the next organism over fertility. Watson and Crick in 53 can be drawn as an analogy because it's the mechanistic understanding of biology somewhat to what Newton did when he laid down the principles of physics. And it's important to make that connection because Newton's principle of physics was 200 years earlier than Watson and Crick. And the reason that's interesting is that it means that the implications of the gene and molecular biology and flow of information is something very recent and very new in terms of our understanding of technology and science. And therefore, we haven't seen anything like full fruition of what that discovery will mean. And then over the next 15 or so years, the whole scientific community in biological science struggled with the problem of how information flowed from DNA into the cell. Through this, DNA makes RNA makes protein, the central dogma, the genetic code, the idea that genes could be turned on and turned off, was all things pursued in departments of biology by a few people studying these unimportant bacteriophage, working with bacteria, trying to struggle with the question of what was a gene and how information flowed into the cell. And this took us through the mid-60s and up into the early 70s, where this is still a major topic. I was in high school when this was published 50 years ago. It's Genobe and Monod's model of gene regulation. And then, as we look at the evolution of that timeline in life science, what we see then is that molecular biology really started in 1953. The next 15 years or so was very academic in understanding the flow of this information into the cell. And then in the late 60s, early 70s, we obtained the ability as a scientific community to do synthetic biology. For the first time, we could do synthetic biology. We could synthesize a gene, we could sequence a gene, and we could combine genes and pieces of genes together. And that brought us to the age of biotechnology, which occurred in the early 70s through the mid-70s to the late 80s. We're at the most fundamental and rudimentary type of technology. We took what we understood about a gene and moved it into society to begin to use this molecular biology to solve problems in society. At the same time, the interest in the gene and the human genome grew enormously, and in the late 80s, early 90s, the Human Genome Initiative was undertaken with great vision and leadership. And then through the 90s to 2001, 2003, the Human Genome Initiative developed a technology to actually sequence, computationally compare, and then deal with the complexity of the human genome. But the really important part of that initiative from a technology point of view was that we developed the ability to sequence genetic information in large volumes very cheaply. And this has opened all of life science to this issue of comparison and new genes from various biology to be used in molecular and genetic manipulation and understanding life systems about us. So where does this bring us? This brings us to what we have called the third revolution, the first being the molecular biology revolution, the second being genomics, to what we're going to deal with in part in the future, taking this information, integrating it into convergence with other disciplines to make a difference in the world. Now, as this has happened, the universities have become sources of great technology that have impacted on society, and this life science has as well. And I want to make a point about that as I think about this. I developed, or this slide was developed in a committee at MIT where we were looking at entrepreneurship. And it struck me when I looked at it as to what a modern university means and what the technology and investment in a university means over decades in terms of impact on society. As I said, molecular biology began 60 years ago. Other technology, or some of which I'll mention in a moment, also in the same time scale. And when we look at a modern university like MIT, here sitting on the river of the Charles, and what you note around it in all these black spaces is high-tech biotech. I'll show you another slide of that. Computation, technology, software, hardware in some part, Pfizer here, Novartis there, Biogen over here. This is what a university means to society. It means jobs and the economy and technology moving off the campus into society, changing over 10, 20, 30 years what is happening in society. And the striking thing about this is that it means from the location of those companies next to MIT that technology moves by 2 feet. Technology doesn't move by licensing agreements. Technology moves by people moving from a campus to someplace nearby where they can actually work with others and create. So technology moves by 2 feet. And this is the biotech side of that cluster. This is, again, MIT here. This is a biotech cluster in Cambridge, right across the river from Mass General, right down from Harvard and the hospitals over at Harvard Medical School. And it is one of the most striking clusters of biotechnology and biological science in the world. So we see now that the first technology, molecular biology, was very academic, gave rise to biotechnology and the technology we're doing now. The second revolution is the Human Genome Initiative, which has brought forth an enormous amount of information and technology, which is changing the way we do biology, the way we think about science, the way we think about medicine, the way we think about a wide variety of other activities in science. The third revolution that will be needed to address some of the challenges of the future is the integration of life science at a molecular level with engineering, physical science, mathematics, and computation. And we've called this the third revolution just to bring attention to the fact that it is something over the next several decades we will invest more and more into. Another way of capturing this is actually the words of Susan Hockfield, who I think is on the committee. I found this quote, and I like that. Physicists gave engineers the electron, and they created the IT revolution. Biologists gave the engineers a gene, and together they will create the future. Think about that. Well, the electron was discovered in 1897. And it was in the early parts of the 19th century where Edison made light out of the electron. We found generators, motors. Where are we at in biology? I think we have the light bulb in using gene as technology. We're at the stage of the light bulb. We haven't developed the phonograph yet. We don't have transmission through microwaves and waves of information. We don't have television, and we're far from the day in which we have an iPhone or an iPad. But that's 100 years for the electron. We've only had 60 years for the gene. In the next 50 years, it's going to be some of this in terms of the impact of this technology on society. Well, while the biologists were doing this, the engineers and other aspects in society were not there waiting on us. They created a revolution in their own sphere, a revolution in information technology, storage and processing of large data sets, synthesis of composite materials at nanoscale, microfabrication, sensitive and quantitative measuring devices, including imaging, and control technology, dynamics, just to mention a few. But we think about this progress in life science, but we don't think enough about all the technology that can now be wedded to that progress in life science through convergence to actually bring solutions to major societal problems in the future. And educating people at this interface between the engineering and to the science is really what, in my opinion, convergence is about. Sorry. Engineers also have toolkits that we, as biologists, don't think of in a day-to-day way that can be used to solve very important problems. Questions like information theory and modeling of complex systems, and then quantitation, inherent in how engineers approach any problem. Quantitate it. If you can quantitate it, you can control it. So quantitate it initially. Kinetics analysis of complex systems, synthesis of new complex systems. These are things that engineers come naturally to. They teach in their courses. They bring them to everything they do. And this is part of what we need to integrate into our life science to make it as productive as we can in education and in the ways of advancing our science. Now, as was mentioned a few moments ago, when we think about what over the next 20 or 30 years we need to address as a society as grand challenges, some of those are very easy to see. And in the new biology of the 21st century, produced by the Academy, and many people who are in this room contributed enormously to it, we listed some grand challenges, such as food for an increasing population, energy from renewable resources, the environment as we understand the uses of our science and technology to produce food, engineering, and other aspects, how to manage our environment to keep it as pristine and as enjoyable and as renewable, as sustainable as possible. And then in medicine, individualizing healthcare surveillance. But the thing that's really important, if you step back over 20, 50 years, if we are going to have sustainable populations on this earth over 100 years from now, we're going to have to use renewable resources to do it. And renewable resources means integrating life science into food production, energy to make it more efficient, how we understand the environment, and how to maintain it under those conditions. And that's going to require convergence of engineering into life science and life science into engineering in new ways that we haven't even thought about. Now, as you heard this morning from Tom Khalil and from others here, the leaders of the Academy, this idea of convergence has become part of how some agencies, some organizations in the government, and many universities, as represented by people in this room, are thinking about the future. And I just used a quote from the White House priorities. Agencies should give priority to R&D investments, including research at the interfaces of biology, physical science, and engineering. And clearly the BRAIN Initiative is one of those. And as you also heard, there are many universities across the country who have established institutes and organizations and even departments to bring together life science, engineering, physical science, computational science, and this is just a list of a few of them. This list does not even come close to exhausting all the organizations around the country that have undertaken these types of initiatives. It has grown organically from the interest of students and faculty in universities around the country to be involved in this because they believe it's going to be an essential part of how society functions and where exciting problems are to be solved. Now, when we talk about convergence in institutions, we can use some specific examples, and I want to briefly discuss some of the activity, or one particular activity at MIT in the context of convergence, because it gives you some feeling as to what I'm thinking of and others are thinking about. But this is only one specific example in a much broader set of examples around the country. And when I was thinking about this the other day, I ran across this piece from the background for your committee activity of degrees of integration, and I really thought this captured some of the things one could think about in terms of unidisciplinary, multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, and the descriptors underneath is what really got me. And then transdisciplinary, transcending, transgressing, and transforming. And I hope that convergence in some institutions in many places will be transdisciplinary in that they will transcend, transgress, and transform how we do things and think of things and create new fields and new people in the future. So let me talk about one institution at MIT to give you some feeling about how this evolved in a specific example. And we have to go back in, again, to early 1970s when I said we understood the gene and we understood that there was a large societal need to make advances in cancer. And this led to Richard Nixon signing the War on Cancer, or the National Cancer Institute Act, that established the NCI. At MIT, it led in 1974 to converting a candy factory on the edge of the campus. This used to be a chocolate candy factory into a cancer center. and Salvador Luria taking the directorship of that cancer center to address the problem of cancer at the level of molecular cell biology and a gene. And that cancer center had 13 faculty. I joined the cancer center in the Department of Biology at MIT in 1974, and in fact led it for 8 years and then led the Department of Biology after that. There were 5 Nobel Prizes associated with the 13 faculty in and associated with that cancer center. Salvador Luria, as you see here on the lower left, with Nancy Hopkins and Dave Baltimore in a photograph taken in the center, but then there was many others. And the Cancer Center continued to progress over the next 30 years in terms of making progress on understanding cancer. But when we looked out over the next 30 years and asked the question, what should we be doing at MIT to contribute to the problem of cancer and to contribute to our understanding of how biological systems functioned, led by Tyler Jacks and with lots of support from Bob Langer, we looked at the issue of creating a new institution to integrate biological science related to cancer to engineering related to cancer, and to then do a transdisciplinary transformation in this problem of addressing cancer by taking engineering and biologists, putting them together in a structure, integrating them socially and culturally, and encouraging and nucleating and educating one another to then bring this problem of understanding cancer and approaching cancer to a new level. And this led us to then take the cancer biologists, who's a group here of intramural cancer biologists who are interested in things like Angelica Amon up at the top and how genomic stability is maintained, to Tyler Jackson mouse models of cancer, to how signaling occurs with DNA repair in treatment of cancer, to all sorts of models of cancer, cancer biologists working at a molecular, cellular, and organismic level. And combining that with, again, 12 engineers who are interested in things like nanoparticle formulation in biological systems, material sciences, sensing with micro devices, single cell analysis, immune analysis of single cells, and Bob Langer being a very prominent leader in materials interacting with biological systems. So this was taking in real time convergence and turning it into a confluence of engineering and life science together. And we moved into the building about 3 years ago, a little less than that, 2.5. That led, with leadership at MIT, to the establishment of the Koch Institute, which is shown here. The Koch Institute is 192,000 feet. 10% of it is committed to core facilities. Every floor has a suite of biology labs and engineering labs. All the faculty are clustered in the middle, sharing faculty space, all the social spaces in the middle, your lecture halls, your seminar rooms, your social space, your coffee rooms. And then on the first floor is the cafeteria that we all come together to use. So when you take an institution, and this is only one institution at MIT, the Whitehead Institute was formed in the early 80s on developmental biology. The McGovern and the PICAR was formed in the early 2000s to study brain initiatives at a level of molecular and cellular and systems. The Broad Institute across the street was established for human genome and high throughput biological systems, and the Koch Institute then to look at the problem of cancer. So in bringing these people together, we had to deal with and study and think about culture. And culture within an institution is a very important aspect in having the institution function. And what does this culture mean? In my opinion, these are things that pulls us together. These are the things that make us live as a unit and learn from each other. And that's very important if you want to have a group of individuals then contribute as not individuals but a sum of the whole. And a unifying theme or objective to think about. In the Cancer Center, it is the issue of cancer as a question. Control of membership and shared responsibility. Shared responsibility for who joins the Institute, who is recruited, and how they're promoted. Shared responsibility for research funding and mentoring. Shared mentoring of graduate students, people sitting on each other's graduate committees. Research funding and program funding, institute funding. Make funding the core that brings people together. And you have to have some discretionary funding, in my opinion, to be able to do that, to nucleate collaborations between people. Shared core research facilities, fighting over cores and how cores are supported, and what is in a core is a very important part of bringing people together. And then communal activities, lectures, retreats, workshops, parties. Parties weekly is a very important thing in bringing students. Faculty are too busy to actually interact a lot. Most of your actual collaborations will come out of postdocs and students who talk to each other and find they have shared tools that can work. So in the last thing I will say, how is it working? Well, it's working because these sorts of things appear on the walls at the Koch Institute. This is the Friday afternoon focus seminar where a postdoc or graduate student comes, gives a talk of 30 minutes. As they walk in the room, if they want a Coke or a beer, there's a Coke or a beer. And then they go to a floor in the building and have a party. And they have pizza and other things, sharing it. The doctor is in. This is we have medical fellows and actually visiting physicians from Harvard, Dana-Farber, or Mass General come and give tutorials on cancer, and I have engineers and biology graduate students and postdocs and faculty come and listen to what the real problem of cancer is as you treat it. Crossfire programs started by graduate students and postdocs to teach things like modeling cancer in mice and specific technology. It could be shared across various different labs. Again, bring graduate students and postdocs together. And the engineering genius are started by postdocs and graduate students in engineering who want to teach the biologists their tools and their thought patterns in engineering. So bringing these together as a building and as a unit is what allows us to hope and expect that out of this will come engineers who are very informed and interested in life science, and biologists who are very comfortable working and studying and dealing with engineers and translating their knowledge into engineering and into society. So thank you very much for your